An old Marine never leaves someone behind. But what if saving a stranger means risking the only thing you have left? Ethan Walker, a veteran farmer, battles to save his family's land, drowning in debt and regret. When an injured woman stumbles onto his property, she's no ordinary hiker. She's the runaway daughter of one of America's most ruthless billionaires, fleeing a forced marriage arranged to secure a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire. Now, Ethan must decide between turning her in for a life-changing payout or protecting her against an enemy more powerful than any he faced in combat. Will honor overcome desperation? Will courage defeat greed? Keep watching to uncover how a chance encounter ignites a dramatic battle for freedom, dignity, and redemption. If you love stories of ordinary heroes fighting extraordinary battles, hit that subscribe button now. Support our channel and then stay tuned for more gripping tales of courage, sacrifice, and old-fashioned American grit. Ethan Walker stood at the edge of his sun-scorched fields, shoulders weighed down by a lifetime of labor and a fresh notice from the bank. The crisp sheet of paper in his calloused hand read, "Final warning" in bold letters, its meaning clear as the midday sun. 3 decades he had toiled on this land, and generations of Walkers before him had weathered war, drought, and economic depressions, but the threat of foreclosure now loomed larger than any storm cloud. Ethan was 47, a widower, a father who rarely saw his own daughter, and a veteran whose nights were haunted by memories from battlefields far away. Though strong in build, the lines of hardship etched around his eyes revealed a man holding on by a thread. As a boy, he had run barefoot through these same fields, chasing after his father, dreaming of the day he would steward Redwood Farm himself. Now he stood at the brink of losing it all, like a guardian forced to surrender his post. A gentle breeze rustled the brittle corn stalks, carrying with it the soft pant of Ranger, his aging German Shepherd mix. The dog had been his constant companion ever since Ethan returned from deployment overseas. Ranger limped a bit, a testament to the shrapnel that had once torn through Ethan's convoy, but he never lost his vigilance. He sensed Ethan's despair and pressed his large head against his master's thigh in a comforting gesture. Ethan bent down, absently ruffling the dog's ears. "I'm all right, boy," he murmured. Though he wasn't sure if that was entirely true, he walked on, boots crunching over the barren soil, heading toward the old oak that stood on the southeastern boundary. Beneath that tree lay a simple grave marker. His late wife, Evelyn, had found her final rest under the shade she loved in life. "I don't know how much longer I can hold on," he said quietly, standing at her graveside. It was a confession offered to the wind, to the memory of a woman who had believed in him long after he'd stopped believing in himself. He had promised her 2 things when she fell ill: that their teenage daughter, Stella, would have every chance to flourish, and that Redwood Farm would stay in the family. Now Stella was living with her aunt in the city, a choice made so she could attend a better school, and the bank threatened to repossess the only home Ethan had ever known. The sky offered not a single cloud to interrupt the merciless sun, as if mocking the dryness that had plagued Redwood Farm for years. Another drought season was upon them, and the well was dangerously low. Ethan needed a financial miracle or, at the very least, a timely loan extension. Yet the bank's repeated refusals had left him with more regrets than options. Feeling the weight of hopelessness pressing in, he tucked the notice into his back pocket and turned away from Evelyn's grave. That was when he noticed Ranger's hackles rising. The dog stood rigid, ears perked toward the tree line that bordered the southeastern field. Ethan narrowed his gaze, spotting a flash of movement among the foliage. He couldn't be certain, but it looked like a person, definitely not a local, as few outsiders ever ventured onto these rural roads. A moment later, whoever it was staggered forward and collapsed in the dirt. Surprised and suddenly alert, Ethan broke into a run, heart pounding as he shouted to Ranger, "Stay close!" Ethan reached the figure just as Ranger began circling, nose twitching in concern. The prone individual was a woman. Her clothes, designed for serious hiking, were muddied and torn, and her hair was matted with dirt and leaves. Blood seeped from a cut on her temple. She lay there unconscious, breathing shallowly. Ethan knelt down, pressing 2 fingers gently to her neck to check her pulse. It was weak but discernible. Although Redwood Farm was miles from the nearest hiking trail, the new perspective revealed fresh scrapes and bruises on her arms, suggesting she'd taken a bad fall somewhere. His immediate thought was how far she must have come on foot. There were no vehicles in sight, no logical reason someone would trek alone through this stretch of farmland. Even the local youth rarely bothered to trespass anymore. "Hang in there," he said quietly, scooping her into his arms. A dull alarm rang in his mind. The woman was dressed in gear far too expensive for any regular drifter or casual traveler. But suspicion could wait. Right now, she needed help. His truck was parked at the head of the field, and he carefully carried her, relieved that she was at least light enough for him to manage without straining his bad knee. Ranger trotted alongside, whining anxiously as if sensing the urgency. The midday heat bore down on them, sweat beading on Ethan's forehead. He was reminded of field evacuations during his time in the service, adrenaline spiking, mind racing with possible complications. As he settled her into the passenger seat, he noticed an expensive watch clasped around her wrist. It glinted in the sunlight, a sleek metal design with a name brand that would likely cost more than his monthly mortgage. The incongruity of her presence here luxury watch, top-tier hiking attire, and a battered, bleeding face unsettled him. "What's your story?" he muttered, though he expected no answer. Then he fired up the truck, engine rattling with old age. On the drive back to the farmhouse, Ethan kept one eye on the road and the other on the stranger slumped in the seat beside him. He was tempted to head straight to the hospital in the next county, but that was a solid 40-minute drive. He worried she might not handle the bumpy roads well if she was seriously injured. He decided his best bet was to get her stable first, check for major injuries, and then see if he could contact someone in town with a decent medical background. When they arrived at the two-story white farmhouse, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, Ethan carefully carried her inside. The living room was modest and warm, cluttered with old family photos and a throw blanket that had once belonged to his grandmother. He placed her gently on the couch, propping her head with a cushion and quickly dispatching Ranger to fetch a water bowl, though the dog merely cocked his head, obviously uncertain how to obey. While Ranger watched with alert eyes, Ethan hurried to fetch his dusty first aid kit from the linen closet. He knelt by the couch and began cleaning the gash on her temple. The act of helping a total stranger brought a mixture of déjà vu and deep-seated duty. Even though the war was behind him, he could still feel the adrenaline-laced sense of responsibility that had guided him through rescue missions overseas. Her forehead wound was nasty, but didn't appear life-threatening. As he doused a clean cloth with antiseptic, she stirred, a low moan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a flash of sharp intelligence beneath the haze of pain. She looked around, confused, then tried to sit up. "Easy," Ethan said gently, pressing a firm hand on her shoulder. "You took a bad tumble. My name's Ethan Walker. You're safe." She blinked, trying to focus. "Where?" she began, her voice raw. "You're at Redwood Farm," Ethan replied, carefully finishing the bandage around her temple. "About 12 miles from the nearest town called Buckley." She winced, touching the bandage lightly. How? How did I get here?" "You stumbled onto my property and collapsed. Found you by the southeast field." He eyed her expensive gear and the watch. Despite the grimy state, her entire demeanor suggested a polished world far removed from these dusty acres. "Mind telling me your name?" For a moment, she hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Then she swallowed. "Veronica. Veronica Sterling." A faint tremor ran through her, half from pain and half from whatever she was hiding. "Thank you for helping me." Ethan nodded, rummaging for an ice pack. "Well, Veronica, you've got a nasty cut and probably some bruised ribs. I'm no doctor, but I've seen enough injuries to guess you'll need rest." He paused, observing her labored breathing. "You hurt anywhere else?" She drew in a shaky breath. "My ankle. Twisted it or something." Gingerly, Ethan set her foot on the couch's armrest, removing her muddy boot. The joint was swollen and discolored. "Looks like a sprain. Or worse. Let me get you some ice." Veronica exhaled, still disoriented. Her eyes darted around the cozy living room pictures of a younger Ethan with a bright-eyed woman, an old wedding photo, a teenage girl holding a basketball, and numerous black and white portraits of older relatives. In the corner, a tattered American flag folded into a triangle stood atop a shelf, alongside medals and a photograph of a Marine unit. It struck her as a place steeped in family history and quiet pride, the complete opposite of the world she'd left behind. She mumbled an apology as Ethan carefully elevated her ankle and wrapped it with a bandage and an ice pack. Then he offered her a glass of water, which she sipped gratefully. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice quivering. "I didn't mean to trespass." "You're not trespassing," Ethan said simply, though his gaze remained cautious. "But I do need to know if anyone's looking for you. You in trouble with the law?" At that, Veronica's face paled. She shook her head vehemently. "No, I'm not a criminal. Just," she searched for the right words, "just trying to get away from a situation. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't call the police or anyone else right now." Ethan studied her for a moment. He recalled that the bank was on the verge of repossessing his land, that he had plenty of troubles of his own. The last thing he needed was more complications. But his instincts told him Veronica was genuinely scared not just of her inbrus, but of whoever might be searching for her. "All right," he finally said, "I won't make any calls. But if that ankle doesn't start healing, you might not have a choice." She nodded, exhaling in relief. Her eyes fluttered shut again, exhaustion pulling her under. Ethan watched, unsettled by the entire scenario, yet unable to turn away someone in need. Ranger patted over, sniffed Veronica's hand, then settled down protectively at the foot of the couch. The next day dawned in an uneasy hush. Veronica woke to the aroma of fresh coffee and the throbbing in her temple subdued to a dull ache. She found herself alone in the living room, Ranger lying alert by the front door, and the sound of footsteps in the kitchen. Slowly, she pushed the worn blanket aside and propped herself on her elbows, testing her ankle. Pain flared, but at least it wasn't as excruciating as before. She heard Ethan speaking in a low voice, perhaps on the phone. The tone was clipped, full of quiet frustration. Rising carefully, she leaned on the back of the couch to hobble her way toward the doorway. Ethan stood with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. "I understand, but there has to be some extension," he was saying. "Look, I served this country. Yeah, I know that doesn't matter to you. Fine, just give me another week. That's all I'm asking." Veronica could guess the nature of the call without hearing the other end. The tension in his shoulders and the resigned slump when he ended the call spoke volumes about how dire his financial situation must be. She felt a pang of guilt. Here she was, imposing on someone who was already teetering on the edge of his own crisis. He turned, phone in hand, and noticed her presence. His expression softened slightly. "How's the ankle sore?" she admitted. "But I can manage." Ethan nodded, placing the phone down on the counter. "I made coffee." "Figured you could use a cup." He gestured to the steaming mug beside a half-eaten plate of eggs. "Help yourself, if you're up to it." Veronica hobbled to the table, lowering herself into the chair. She took a careful sip of the coffee, more grateful for the warmth than the taste. As she observed him moving around the kitchen, there was a silent question in her eyes. He noticed, reading her expression. "That was the bank," he said bluntly, not in a mood to pretend. "I'm late on payments again. Redwood Farm, my family's land, might be repossessed sooner than I expected." She set the mug down, suddenly feeling invasive. "I'm sorry," she offered quietly. Ethan shrugged, wiping his hands on a towel. "Not your fault. But now you see I'm not exactly in a position to deal with more trouble." He paused, pressing his lips together. "Any idea if someone's going to come looking for you?" Before Veronica could answer, Ranger perked his ears at the distant hum of an engine. Ethan's body tensed as he stepped over to the window. Through a crack in the curtain, they saw a sleek black SUV rolling up the gravel driveway, moving slowly as though searching for something. Two men in dark suits sat inside. Veronica's breath caught in her throat. Her skin went cold. "They found me," she whispered, eyes wide with dread. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the vehicle. Memories of covert ops and ambushes flickered in his mind. He knew the stance of men accustomed to intimidation. Stay put, he warned, moving toward the door. I'll handle this. She tried to protest, but he was already stepping onto the porch, Ranger following at his heel. Veronica sank deeper into her chair, heart hammering. She had no idea what kind of confrontation lay ahead. But one thing was certain, these men weren't going to leave politely. Ethan squared his shoulders as he walked out onto the creaking porch. The two men climbed out of the SUV, wearing matching frowns and earpieces coiled behind their ears like serpents. They surveyed the farm with barely concealed disdain, as if they'd stepped into a realm beneath them. One of them, a tall fellow with slicked back hair, approached. "Good morning," the man said, his tone polite but cold. "We're looking for someone." He pulled out a phone and showed Ethan a photo of Veronica in better days hair, neatly styled, immaculate clothing, a luminous smile. "Her name's Veronica Sterling. We believe she might be nearby." Ethan regarded the photo with a neutral expression, returning the phone. "Haven't seen her." Ranger let out a low growl, sensing his master's tension. The second man, shorter but more menacing in stance, eyed the dog warily. "Are you sure, sir?" he asked, voice dripping with skepticism. "Local hikers or travelers could easily wander onto your property." "I'm sure," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "I don't get many visitors out here, mostly just me and the dog. Now, if you don't mind, I've got work to do." The tall man gave a tight-lipped smile. "We're employed by Sterling Group. Ms. Sterling is the daughter of Charles Sterling. She's in a very delicate state, and her family is concerned for her safety." Ethan feigned polite confusion. "That's so. Well, sorry I can't help." He turned slightly, blocking their view of the window. The men stepped onto the first porch stair, but Ethan placed a firm hand on the railing. "This is private property. You got a warrant?" They exchanged looks. "We're not law enforcement." "Sir," the shorter one said, trying a different angle, "we just need to check your fields and outbuildings to ensure she's not injured somewhere." Ethan didn't budge. "I said I haven't seen her. If you want to traipse around my land, come back with official paperwork. Otherwise, I suggest you move along." The tall man exhaled, evidently annoyed. He slid a business card from his coat pocket, thrusting it into Ethan's hand. "If you do see her, call us immediately. Mr. Sterling can be very helpful to those who cooperate." The implication hovered in the air like a bribe. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had no illusions about the precarious position of his finances. Still, he stuffed the card in his pocket without a word. The men regarded him for a beat, then retreated to their SUV, though the glances they cast around the property implied they weren't fully convinced. Ethan waited until they drove off down the gravel path before releasing a long breath. Ranger let out a soft whine. "I know, boy," Ethan murmured, running a hand over the dog's head. "This is the last thing we need." Inside, he found Veronica leaning on the wall, her face white with panic. "Are they gone?" she asked in a hushed voice. He nodded. "For now, but something tells me they'll be back." Veronica's shoulders slumped, a mixture of relief and fear swirling in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I never should have come here. I've put you in danger." Ethan gave her a measured look, recalling the business card burning a hole in his pocket and the bank's ultimatum. "You want to tell me why they're after you?" Veronica's composure wavered. She sank onto the couch, wincing when her ankle throbbed. For a moment, she looked too tired to lie. "Charles Sterling is my father," she confessed, voice trembling. "He's CEO of Sterling Group, a multinational tech conglomerate, and I'm his only child." Ethan folded his arms. "So you're wealthy?" It came out more as a statement than a question. She let out a hollow laugh. "Wealthy doesn't cover it. Sterling Group handles everything from consumer electronics to private security contracts. My father plans to merge with Westlake Industries, another giant in the same sector. Part of that merger involves me." Ethan raised an eyebrow. How exactly? Her gaze dropped to the floor. "A marriage," she said quietly, as though the word itself left a bitter taste. "An arranged union between me and the heir of Westlake. It's a massive corporate move, billions of dollars on the line. But I don't love him. I don't even like him. Yet my father expects me to play along without question." Ethan leaned against the wall, digesting this. He was no stranger to duty. He'd served his country and sacrificed plenty. But the idea of being bartered away as part of a business deal struck him as abhorrent. So you ran? Veronica nodded, rubbing her bandaged temple. I snuck out 2 nights ago, disabled the trackers on my phone and car, and tried to vanish. But I guess they found me anyway. A bitter smile crossed her face. Money buys a lot of things, like top-tier security teams. Ethan let out a slow breath. So if you go back, you'll be forced into this marriage. More or less, she admitted. My father is used to controlling every detail. He raised me to be an asset trained in business, finance, public relations. The only thing I wasn't allowed to do was live my own life. She paused, glancing at Ethan, perhaps expecting judgment. I know it sounds ridiculous, running from privilege, but it's a cage, and I'm tired of being locked inside. He looked away for a moment, remembering the ways he'd felt caged himself by trauma, by the bank, by responsibilities to a farm he loved but couldn't save. I'm not here to judge, he said finally, but those guys will come back. And when they do, they'll bring more than polite conversation if they think you're hiding here. Veronica swallowed hard. I understand if you want me gone. Ethan eyed the swirl of dust motes in a sunbeam cutting through the living room. Part of me says that would be best. I'm close to losing this place, and I don't need more trouble. But you're injured, and I'm not about to throw you out on the street. That's not how I was raised. Her eyes glistened with gratitude, but she quickly brushed away the emotion. I promise I'll figure out something soon. I can't let them drag you into my mess. Ethan nodded slowly, a knot of tension building in his chest. He wanted to protect Redwood Farm and maybe, just maybe, protect this woman who seemed even more lost than the land he stood to lose. All right, he said, meeting her gaze. We'll figure it out. But don't expect me to roll over for your father's goons. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Ethan set Veronica up in the spare bedroom upstairs, near a window that overlooked the western fields where the soil was less parched. He brought in some crutches that had been gathering dust in the barn remnants of an old injury of his father's and adjusted them to Veronica's height. She tested them, wincing but soldiering on. While she rested, Ethan busied himself with the myriad tasks that came with keeping a farm afloat, even one on the brink. He tinkered with the worn-out irrigation pump by the barn, wrestling with rusted bolts and frayed hoses. Nearby, Ranger lay panting in the shade, casting frequent glances back toward the house as though afraid Veronica might vanish. In the late afternoon, Ethan walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway, half hoping for a letter of reprieve from the bank. Instead, he found only another notice, the red text marking urgency. Sighing, he shoved the envelope into his jacket, refusing to let the news sink his spirits further for now. On his way back, he scanned the horizon, his senses sharpened, anticipating a return visit from those black-suited men. He spotted no cars, but the tension remained. By dusk, he'd prepared a modest dinner from canned soup, stale bread, and whatever fresh vegetables he could salvage. Veronica joined him downstairs, determined not to be a burden. She limped slowly, leaning on the crutches. Her face was still pale, and the bandage on her temple was conspicuous, but she held herself with a quiet dignity. Over the clink of spoons against chipped bowls, they exchanged fragments of their pasts in halting conversation. Veronica spoke briefly about growing up in a city penthouse, surrounded by tutors, bodyguards, and corporate functions. I used to dream about living in the countryside, she admitted, where no one recognized me, and I could be, normal. Ethan avoided her gaze, his mind flipping through images of bombed-out villages and desert nights under fire. He swallowed, clearing the roughness in his throat. I dream about saving this land, he said quietly. My father inherited Redwood Farm from his father, and so on. It's been in our family for over a century. I promised my wife I'd keep it for Stella, our daughter. A gentle silence followed. Veronica seemed to sense the weight of that promise. Where is she now? With her aunt in the city, better schools, more opportunities. He said, voice thick. She's 16, brilliant, wants to be a scientist. If I keep her here, her future would be limited. I can't do that to her. Veronica reached across the table, gingerly placing her hand on his. You're giving her a chance. That's what parents do, and I'm sure she'll appreciate it one day. Ethan looked away, blinking back a sting of tears he rarely allowed himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing on every front, but hearing Veronica's gentle words offered a sliver of comfort. He rose abruptly, picking up the dishes. I'll clean up. You should get more rest. Veronica nodded, understanding he needed a moment. As she made her way back to the stairs, she paused by a family photo. In it, Ethan stood with an arm around a smiling woman, a young Stella beaming between them. Redwood Farm appeared lush and vibrant in the background flowers, green rows of corn, a bright sky. Veronica exhaled, longing for a life where such simple joy was possible. Night settled over Redwood Farm, bringing with it a deeper stillness that seemed to envelop every corner of the property. Unaccustomed to rural darkness, Veronica found herself wandering the house, limping from window to window, drawn by the silhouettes of far-off trees and the shimmering stars she rarely saw in the city's light pollution. She paused at the living room window, letting her thoughts drift. Ethan, meanwhile, was in the barn, finishing a last-minute repair on a leaky pipe. The overhead light flickered ominously, casting sharp shadows across tools and dusty rafters. He worked by instinct and muscle memory, his mind swirling with the day's events. Veronica's presence was a complication, yet he couldn't deny a glimmer of empathy, an echo of the times he had felt trapped in a situation beyond his control. Eventually, he returned to the house and found her at the window. Couldn't sleep, he asked softly. She turned, startled. I'm not used to silence like this, she admitted. There's always traffic or phones ringing in my world. Here, it's peaceful, but also unsettling, if that makes sense. He gave a small nod. Takes some getting used to. Sometimes you hear the coyotes howling, or the wind through the fields. Actually, I can't sleep in the city because it's too noisy. They shared a brief smile, an odd sense of mutual understanding forming between two people who, just 24 hours ago, were complete strangers. Tomorrow, Ethan began, leaning against the back of the couch. I'm going to try to fix the main irrigation pump. If that fails, I don't know what else I'll do. Maybe look for part-time work in Buckley. Her expression softened. Is there no other option? A loan or something? He laughed bitterly. I've been trying for months. But without steady income, the bank sees me as a bad bet. The farm's on the brink, and they won't gamble on a property that's essentially underwater figuratively and literally starved of water. Veronica was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the window pane. I can't offer anything right now, she said slowly. But if I had access to my own accounts, maybe I could help. Ethan stiffened. The idea of taking charity grated on him, not to mention the suspicious timing. I'm not looking for handouts. She met his gaze evenly. I understand. I wouldn't see it as a handout, but as an investment. If that's what it comes down to, I hate seeing someone lose what they love. A lump formed in his throat, pride warred with desperation. Before he could respond, Ranger let out a sharp bark. Both of them tensed, old instinct kicking in for Ethan, who moved to the side door. He flicked on the porch light, scanning the yard. The beam revealed a dark sedan parked just off the main road. Headlights off. Stay here, he muttered to Veronica, stepping outside. His heart hammered, memories of night patrols and hostile territory flooding his brain. Ranger followed at his heel, hair bristling. The sedan's engine hummed to life, and the car pulled back onto the road, vanishing into the blackness. Ethan stood there, breathing hard, the night air cold against his skin. It dawned on him that the watchers had never really left. They were just waiting, biding their time until it was safe or strategically advantageous to swoop in. With a chill running down his spine, he realized that sheltering Veronica might cost him far more than an inconvenience. Morning broke to the sound of an engine rumbling up the driveway. Veronica peeked through the curtain, spotting a dusty pickup truck approaching not the sleek black SUVs. She let out a breath, relieving some tension. Ethan appeared behind her, coffee mug in hand. "That's just Ray Donovan," he said. "My neighbor a mile down the road." Seconds later, a stout man in overalls climbed out of the truck, slamming the door with a practiced thud. He carried a toolbox and wore a friendly grin beneath his gray-streaked mustache. Ethan met him outside. "Morning, Ray," Ethan greeted, forcing a calm he didn't entirely feel. "Morning, Ethan," Ray replied. "Heard rumors you might need some help with your irrigation pump. Figured I'd drop by with the proper tools." He gave a quick glance toward the house. "Everything all right? Saw a fancy SUV creeping around last night from my window." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Nothing I can't handle," he said quietly. He appreciated Ray's concern. Neighbors out here often looked out for each other, but he wasn't about to drag the man into this complicated mess. "Let's get to the pump, see what we can do." Veronica watched from inside, curiosity mingling with gratitude. Part of her longed to step outside and do something to help any normal farm chore that might distract her from the worry of being hunted. But her ankles still demanded rest, and Ethan had insisted she stay hidden if she saw anyone unfamiliar. Ray and Ethan spent the next couple of hours wrestling with bolts, caked mud, and a cracked seal that had been leaking for weeks. At one point, Ethan trudged back to the house to fetch additional supplies. Pausing in the kitchen for a moment, Veronica was there, leaning on the counter. "How's it going?" she asked. Slowly, he exhaled. "But Ray's a good mechanic. If we're lucky, we can at least patch it enough to get by." She bit her lip, glancing out the window. "I want to help," his expression softened. "There's not much you can do right now. Just focus on recovering." Then he hesitated, looking as though he wanted to say more. "Veronica, if I ask you something, will you answer honestly?" Her eyes flickered, but she nodded. "I'll try. Those men who came by, your father's men, they offered me a deal. Not directly, but implied. Something about how Mr. Sterling can be very helpful to those who cooperate. If I were to give you up, I might save the farm." He spoke plainly, each word weighing heavy. Veronica's stomach twisted, and she found herself gripping the counter. "I wouldn't blame you if you did," she said softly, "but I'm asking you not to. Please." Silence hung between them, and in that moment, Ethan understood the moral line he stood upon. He could yield to desperation or maintain the code he'd lived by since his military days, never abandoning someone who needed him. "I won't," he said, voice resolute, "but I need you to know that this choice might cost me everything." She reached out, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "And I won't forget what you're risking. If there's a way I can fix this, I will." Ethan gave a curt nod, picking up the wrench he'd come inside for. "Let's hope so." Then he disappeared out the door again, leaving Veronica to wonder how far she would go to keep that promise. By mid-afternoon, the makeshift repair to the irrigation pump seemed to hold. Water trickled through the aged pipes, wheezing but persistent. Ray packed up his toolbox, wiping sweat from his brow. "That should keep it going a while." "Ethan," he said, "but you're going to need a new pump soon, and that's not cheap." Ethan forced a grin he didn't feel. "I appreciate everything. Ray, you saved me another day, at least." Ray cocked his head, eyes narrowing. "You know, if you ever want to pool resources, we could talk co-op. A few of the smaller farms around here have been teaming up shared equipment. Group negotiations with buyers might lighten the load." "I'll think about it," Ethan replied diplomatically. He knew cooperation could help, but Redwood Farm was personal, tangled in family legacy and pride. He hated the notion that he couldn't keep it afloat on his own. Once Ray left, Ethan lingered by the pump, watching the water flow in a thin stream, his thoughts drifting to Veronica's predicament. Giving her up would likely mean immediate rescue for Redwood Farm. But each time the thought crossed his mind, he remembered the look of terror in her eyes. She wasn't just fleeing a marriage, she was fleeing a life of no autonomy, used as a corporate pawn. He walked back to the house, boots clumping on the porch steps, where Veronica sat with her bandaged ankle propped on a chair. She'd insisted on leaving the stuffy living room. Despite Ethan's caution, there was a new hardness in her gaze, a resolve that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking," she began, softly but firmly, "about your situation with the bank." He sank onto the porch swing, arms resting on his knees, and her voice was steady. "Let me invest. Not give you money, invest it. We draft papers. Treat it like a proper business deal. I'll buy a stake in Redwood Farm. You keep operational control, and I get a percentage of the profits once the place is solvent again." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Veronica, you said it yourself, you're on the run. How do you plan on accessing any large sums of money without your father finding out?" She sighed. "I have assets in a trust my mother left me. My father can't touch it. And I have a contact who can move funds discreetly, so no red flags go up for him. I'm not talking billions. Ethan, just enough to clear your debt and modernize the farm." He stared at her, the idea both tantalizing and terrifying. "I'm not sure I can accept that," he finally said. "Feels like I'd be selling my pride." She shifted forward, wincing as her ankle twinged. "Pride won't keep Redwood Farm in your family," she said gently. "And let's be honest, I need somewhere to lie low for a while. Somewhere my father won't suspect. This place, he'd never imagined me choosing it, so it's mutual benefit." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, torn. "You realize if you stay here, you're also risking the farm's safety even more. Your father's men aren't going to just give up." Veronica's gaze hardened. "Let them come. If we have legal grounds for me being here, a legitimate contract tying me to the farm, it complicates their approach. Besides, I can't run forever. I need to face him eventually on my terms, not his." He chewed the inside of his cheek, the weight of the decision pressing on him. "So you'd basically buy me out of debt, and in return, I let you stay here under the radar, help you figure out a plan." She nodded. "Exactly. We draw up paperwork so it's official and fair to both of us. And once you're stable, you can buy me out if you want, or we can continue as partners." Ethan leaned back, the porch swing creaking. He glanced toward the oak tree where his wife was buried, remembering that final promise. Slowly, he exhaled. "I'll think about it," he said gruffly. But deep inside, he knew it might be his only real chance. The next day dawned with a haze of humidity hanging low over the fields. Thunderclouds threatened on the horizon, promising the rain that farmers had prayed for but rarely received in recent seasons. Veronica, determined to regain some physical independence, insisted on practicing moving around the property with her crutches. Ethan accompanied her, pointing out the fields of dried corn stalks and the patch of tomatoes he still managed to keep alive near the house. "Used to be we had rows of vegetables and a few orchard trees," he recalled. "But the drought hit us harder each year. I couldn't afford the new irrigation systems, so everything suffered." Veronica examined the soil, the cracked earth, and the pitiful irrigation ditch. She tapped her chin thoughtfully. "With the right investment, you could switch to more drought-resistant crops, or maybe install a drip irrigation system that conserves water." He raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you've done some research." She shrugged. "I might have read up on sustainable agriculture a few years back. My father was on a campaign about using tech to optimize farming, but it was mostly talk. I've found real potential in small-scale farms adapting eco-friendly methods." A flicker of hope crossed Ethan's eyes. He'd never met anyone with money who cared about the actual well-being of farmland. The bankers only saw numbers, and the local politicians only saw taxes. "Would be nice," he admitted, "but it'd cost more than I've got." Veronica didn't reply directly. Her silence hinted at the offer she'd made the day before. They continued their tour, passing the old barn with peeling red paint, its roof sagging dangerously. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunbeams as Veronica surveyed the antique tractor and the rusted tools scattered about. She noticed a row of old family photos tacked to a wooden beam, Ethan's father and grandfather, each standing proudly by a harvest or a new piece of equipment. Generations of walkers, etched into the heart of Redwood Farm. "Your ancestors built this from scratch, didn't they?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. My great-grandfather started it after the Civil War. The family's held on ever since through droughts, the Great Depression, recessions. Feels like I'm the first one who might fail. She placed a hand gently on his arm. You're not failing. You're facing an impossible situation, and you're still fighting, which says a lot about you. Ethan swallowed. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. Sometimes I feel like I'm just treading water, he admitted, and every time a wave comes, I sink a little more. They stepped back outside, greeted by the thick heat of midday. A rumble of thunder in the distance made Ethan glance at the sky. If we get a good rain, maybe it'll save some of the corn, he muttered. I can't remember the last decent storm. Veronica tilted her head, studying him. Ethan, you remember what I said? I'm serious. This isn't about giving you charity or playing savior. It's about mutual benefit. I need a safe place to regroup. You need capital to save the farm. He met her gaze. And how do you see this playing out when your father shows up with his lawyers and private security? Her jaw set. He can threaten all he wants, but if everything is legal and transparent, he'll have to negotiate. That's what the board expects. I might have more leverage than you think. Ethan nodded slowly, the storm clouds swirling behind him like a distant omen. All right, he said. We'll do it, but let's make it airtight. They drafted the agreement in the farmhouse kitchen, hunched over the scarred wooden table that had borne witness to countless family dinners and farm decisions. Veronica insisted on writing everything out in plain English before transferring it into legalese. A lawyer friend of mine will finalize it, she explained, but I want to make sure we're clear on every term. Ethan watched as she scribbled bullet points: capital infusion to pay off the bank, funds for upgrading irrigation, partial ownership stake for Veronica with no voting control over farm operations, future profit sharing once Redwood Farm became profitable again. The pen in her hand moved with steady purpose, as though each line was forging a path out of their separate nightmares. When they finished, Ethan stared at the papers, feeling both relief and trepidation. I never thought I'd have a business partner, he murmured, especially not one who shows up bleeding on my land. She offered a wry grin. Life's full of surprises. He exhaled, standing to stretch. Outside the window, the sky had darkened even more, the wind picking up. Veronica tensed, recalling the watchers who might be lurking out there. But Ethan's focus shifted to something else: an oncoming storm. Let's secure the barn, he said, voice thick with urgency. If we're lucky, it's just heavy rain, but this area sometimes gets tornado warnings. Veronica's eyes widened, but she nodded, following him out, even hobbling on crutches. She was determined to help. They rushed to tie down loose equipment, shut the barn doors tight, and move the tractor under the sturdiest part of the roof. The air crackled with electricity, thick with the smell of ozone and the promise of relief for the parched fields. Ethan's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, a good rain, especially a torrential downpour, could revive some of his crops. On the other, a severe storm could destroy whatever was left. Veronica watched him, sensing the tension. I've never actually wanted it to rain so badly, she half shouted over the rising wind. He glanced at her, a sad sort of smile tugging at his lips. Welcome to the joys of farming. They managed to get back into the house just as the first drops started pelting the tin roof. Standing on the porch, they watched the sky open up. Sheets of rain cascaded onto the fields, turning the dust to mud in an instant. Thunder boomed overhead, making Ranger whine softly. A part of Ethan wanted to cheer water. Finally, but the storm's intensity made him uneasy. Wind rattled the windows, and lightning slashed across the horizon. Veronica gripped the porch railing, knuckles white. This is intense, she muttered. Ethan nodded, scanning the fields for any sign of damage. Been a while since we had a storm like this. Let's hope it doesn't flatten what's left of the corn. Suddenly, a flash of headlights caught Veronica's eye, cutting through the sheets of rain on the road. The shape of a car, maybe two, slowed in front of the house. Ethan followed her gaze, brow furrowing. Could be Ray checking if we're okay, he ventured, but a sinking feeling told him otherwise. The vehicles paused, lights flickering in the downpour, then moved on. Veronica exhaled a shaky breath. They're still out there. Ethan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll handle it, he said, though how, he still wasn't certain. For now, they had a deal that might save Redwood Farm, and a raging storm that might both cleanse and ravage. Fate, it seemed, was dealing all the cards at once. Thunder rumbled throughout the evening, and by the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind drenched fields and a barn still miraculously standing. The soil glistened, soaking up precious water. Ethan and Veronica stood by the porch steps, surveying the damage and the hope. Large puddles dotted the property, and while some corn stalks had toppled, many remained upright. It's not pretty, Ethan observed, running a hand over his stubble, but it might be enough to keep the remaining crop alive a bit longer. Veronica nodded, huddling against the damp morning chill. At least it's something. They spent most of the day assessing the fields. Ethan took meticulous notes of which rows had suffered wind damage. He checked the irrigation channels, newly replenished but still in dire need of an overhaul. In the afternoon, Veronica helped him set up a makeshift water gauge system so he could track how much rain had actually fallen. She marveled at how different her life felt less than a week ago. She was boarding private jets and attending black-tie events. And now she was ankle-deep in mud, learning about soil pH levels from a man who'd become an unlikely ally. During a break, they retreated to the kitchen, where Veronica used Ethan's ancient laptop to finalize the typed version of their investment agreement. She emailed it to her lawyer contact, instructing him to expedite everything. Give it 24 hours, she said, closing the laptop. Then I'll have the funds ready to transfer. Ethan poured them both a cup of coffee, though it was weak and left over from breakfast. Once the bank sees that transaction, they'll back off. Might even extend me a better rate. Veronica leaned against the counter, inhaling the steam from the mug. I can't tell you how much it means that you didn't just turn me over. He looked away, embarrassment creeping in. I won't lie, the thought crossed my mind, but I've seen too much in my time war. Betrayal. If I have a chance to do something right, I'll take it, even if it's not the easiest path. Before she could respond, Ranger let out a low growl from the living room. Footsteps sounded on the porch, heavier and more forceful than Ray's usual stride. Ethan set down his coffee, motioning for Veronica to stay back. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the small window. A bolt of recognition struck him: two men in suits, accompanied by a third figure, an older man with a commanding presence, his silver hair perfectly groomed despite the muddy driveway. Veronica tensed, her face draining of color. Charles, she whispered. Ethan opened the door a crack, meeting the older man's intense gaze. Charles Sterling wasted no time. I'm here for my daughter, he said, voice clipped, eyes darting over Ethan's shoulder. Step aside. Ethan inhaled, feeling the tension radiate like static before a lightning strike. Mr. Sterling, this is private property, he said evenly. You're not welcome here without an invitation. Charles pressed his lips together, motioning to his security detail. I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. Veronica is in a fragile state, and we've come to bring her home. In the kitchen, Veronica leaned against the wall, chest tight. She could picture her father's furious glare, the unstoppable force of his corporate power. Ethan stepped onto the porch, shutting the door behind him to keep Charles from barging in. The men in suits spread out, scanning the yard, no doubt sizing up every possible angle of entry. Ethan cleared his throat. You talk about her like a lost property. She's a grown woman, and if she doesn't want to leave, I'm not forcing her. Charles narrowed his eyes. Who do you think you are, some hero I could buy this entire county 10 times over? Don't test my patience. A flicker of anger rose in Ethan, but he kept his voice unsteady. Then maybe you should use some of that money to treat your daughter like a human being. Veronica heard muffled shouting from where she stood in the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she gripped the counter, flashes of memory tumbling through her mind. Dinners where her father barked orders at staff, board meetings where she was paraded around like a prize, endless lessons in how to smile, speak, and act to advance the Sterling Group's interests. The storm inside her raged as fiercely as any swirling outside. Unable to stay hidden, she forced herself to move. Her ankle protested, but she pushed through the pain, crossing the threshold and appearing in the doorway behind Ethan. Charles Sterling's gaze snapped to her immediately, piercing as a hawk's. His presence seemed to fill the porch, overshadowing even Ethan's tall frame. "Veronica," Charles said, voice dripping with authority. "Come with me, now. You've caused enough trouble." Her breath caught in her throat, but she mustered the courage to stand tall. "No, Father. I won't go with you just because you order it." He took a step forward, and Ethan instinctively put himself between them. The security men tensed. Ranger let out a menacing growl, the fur along his spine standing on end. Charles let out a derisive snort. "This is absurd. I've indulged your little rebellion long enough. Do you realize how much is at stake? The Westlake merger depends on your cooperation. Billions of dollars, thousands of jobs." Veronica felt tears threaten, but held them back, drawing on every ounce of composure she'd ever learned. "What about my life?" she asked quietly. "Do I not matter beyond the deal? Or am I just another asset you can trade?" Her father glared, the muscle in his jaw twitching. "You're a Sterling, and that comes with responsibilities. This trifling escapade of yours ends here." Ethan glanced at her, silently asking if she wanted to fight or flee. She met his gaze, then turned back to Charles. "It doesn't end here, Father. It ends when I say it does. I'm not a child you can bully anymore. And I'm not going to marry someone I barely know just to secure a corporate alliance." Charles stepped onto the porch, and Ethan squared his shoulders. The older man's eyes flicked to the contract papers visible through the open doorway. "What is this nonsense?" he demanded, spying Veronica's signature and the Redwood Farm letterhead. "It's a legitimate agreement," Veronica said, voice hardening. "I'm investing in Redwood Farm. Ethan and I are business partners now." For a moment, Charles looked genuinely surprised. Then scorn twisted his features. "Are you out of your mind? You think pouring money into this failing property will accomplish anything?" "It's a joke. That's not your concern," she replied firmly. "My assets, my decision." Charles let out a barking laugh. "Your assets. Everything you have is because of me. Veronica, don't forget where your fortune comes from." She steadied her breathing. "Part of it is from Mother's trust. You can't touch that, and you can't force me back without creating a media scandal. You might be wealthy, Father, but your empire isn't invincible if I go public with the truth about my so-called engagement." A flicker of genuine alarm crossed Charles's face. Ethan watched, fists tight at his sides, ready to intervene. The two security men shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Charles's carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling. If Veronica exposed the forced marriage angle, it could bring scrutiny none of them wanted. Rain-soaked clouds drifted overhead as father and daughter faced each other, the tension as thick as the humid air. Charles seemed momentarily at a loss for words, grappling with the realization that Veronica had found a lifeline outside his control. He turned his gaze to Ethan, eyes flashing with fury and disdain. Do you have any idea who you're messing with? I could crush you with a single phone call, have this farm foreclosed overnight." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he refused to be intimidated. He'd faced worse threats in combat zones. "Maybe you can," he said evenly, "but that won't solve your problem. Veronica's made her choice. And if you do anything to me or this land, you'll lose her for good. Is that what you want?" Charles's face twisted, torn between anger and the cold logic that governed every business decision he'd ever made. Finally, he exhaled in what might have been exasperation. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, turning to his security detail. "We're leaving." One of the men cleared his throat. "But, sir, we're leaving." Charles snapped, shooting a final glare at Veronica. "This discussion isn't over. Young lady, I'll expect you to come to your senses and return home before the wedding date. If you value your inheritance and your place in the Sterling legacy, you'll do what's right." Veronica held her ground. "I'll handle the wedding negotiations on my terms. Father, if that means the merger goes forward without the marriage, So be it. Charles said nothing, just turned on his heel and then strode back to the SUV. The security men followed, one of them hesitating as if to offer a final warning, but thinking better of it. With the crunch of tires on gravel, the small convoy vanished down the wet road, leaving behind a charged silence. Veronica's chest heaved, a mixture of adrenaline, relief, and lingering fear. She leaned heavily on her crutches, the morning's tension having drained her strength. Ethan gently took her arm, guiding her back into the house. Ranger followed, tail down, uncertain but loyal. Inside, Veronica settled onto the couch, heart still pounding. That was, she began, but couldn't find the right word. Yeah, Ethan replied, his own emotions swirling. A curious mix of triumph and dread settled over him. They'd turned Charles Sterling away, but the man's threat hovered like a dark cloud. Veronica swallowed. He won't give up easily. He'll try to tighten his control back home, maybe freeze any funds I can access. But he can't touch Mother's trust. Ethan rested a hand on the old wooden table where their agreement lay. Then let's finalize this. If your father thinks Redwood Farm is worthless, he won't see us coming when we make it thrive. A spark lit in her eyes. Exactly. She glanced at the photograph of Ethan's wife and daughter on the shelf. I want this place to survive for you, for Stella, and for me too, if I'm honest. It's the first time in a long time I've felt I can build something real. Outside, the post-storm sun began to break through the remaining clouds, bathing the muddied fields in a gentle, hopeful light. They both gazed out the window, hearts beating with a renewed sense of purpose. Ethan imagined new irrigation lines stretching across the land, orchard trees bearing fruit, and the farmhouse restored to its former glory. Veronica pictured a life unshackled from corporate deals, where her choices could actually shape the future. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Trials awaited them both, from Charles's inevitable machinations to the day-to-day grind of resurrecting a failing farm. But for now, they had an alliance forged in adversity, a partnership rooted in trust rather than convenience. As Ethan and Veronica shared a quiet, determined smile, Ranger settled at their feet, as if content to guard this fragile peace. No one knew exactly what the next storm might bring, but at Redwood Farm, they stood ready to face it together, and that, in itself, was a victory. In the end, Ethan Walker and Veronica Sterling proved that integrity and courage still count, especially when faced with impossible odds. Together, they transformed a nearly lost family farm into a thriving symbol of hope, built not just on financial investment, but on trust, honor, and mutual respect. For Ethan, it was redemption. For Veronica, it was freedom. Both found purpose in preserving a legacy and creating something meaningful from struggle. Sometimes, a man's toughest battles aren't fought overseas, they're won at home, against overwhelming forces. If Ethan and Veronica's journey touched your heart or stirred your thoughts about legacy, honor, and second chances, please leave a comment below. We want to hear your stories and opinions, so let's talk. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to support our channel and ensure you never miss another inspiring story celebrating real American values and the strength of the human spirit.